Hi, my name is Dave Reske, CEO of Now Speed Marketing, and welcome to this edition of Marketing in the Now, where we talk about the best ideas of digital marketing. And my guest today is Matt Charney, who specializes in creating smart, compelling content and campaigns that transform brand marketing into real business results. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you. That was an amazing introduction, and I may need a hype man. So thank you for that, and I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad you're here and happy to be your hype man anytime.
Awesome.
Just to give our listeners some context, give us just a brief summary of your background and how you got here.
um, Existential crises and terrible luck. There's some confluence thereof. So I actually, just to keep it very brief, I have a background in screenwriting and development for the entertainment industry, so story development, which has actually turned out to be a pretty good context for when I ended up entering marketing. So I have been working in content marketing, thought leadership, and category creation sort of work now for about 15 years. The primary focus on jobs, careers, and hiring. So that's involved leading content and B2B marketing for companies like theoldmonster.com back when it was an NYSE listed company, Smart Recruiters, and a bunch of other high growth kind of SaaS companies. I am currently the executive editor of Media the largest destination for entertainment related content and resources in the world. And I am an assistant editor for ERE, focusing on covering trends within hiring talent acquisition for them. And then I'm also a principal analyst for a boutique firm, and I research capital markets and startups and try to connect funders with promising products. So
Wow.
wear a lot of different hats.
That's awesome. Sounds like it keeps you busy and you've got a lot of great experience. Well, you've got some of the perfect experience, I think, for the conversation that we're going to have, which is about leveraging AI and your imagination to make boring content entertaining. You and I had a great conversation about that, and I'm looking forward to sharing some more ideas with our listeners. So, first of all, as you think about making boring content entertaining, what's your passion around that? What kind of drives you to want to do that?
Well, so I think, and we use AI as a framework here, and what AI generally is designed to do is to produce an absolute median, right? So it is the absolute middle of all content, good and bad. And so you get kind of good enough, right? And I think that that is just honestly scaling what we've always kind of done in B2B marketing, which is writing the same stuff for the same audiences. And really, the only differences often are the amount of sales angles that are in there, and some proprietary stats, and oftentimes the imaging. But other than that, you can say any major kind of trending SEO topic or evergreen category, and it's not only been done across all mediums, but it was probably done today. So I think there's a lot of fatigue there of just same stuff, different year, different logo, right?
Yeah. So there's a lot of content out there. And of course, B2B companies have all become content producers in the last 5 to 10 years. And so there's an exponential new amount of content that's come out there. So, what do B2B organizations do to stand out?
So I think that's actually much easier than it was before.
Hmm.
And it's quite simple. You have to have, I'm not talking from a brand perspective, but the people who are creating that content really need to have distinct voice, tone, style, and perspective. One of my favorite phrases, it's a cliche, is that good content makes you swear, share, or care.
Hmm.
And so I think the way to stand out is if you can evoke an emotional response, even if that's negative. And I think that companies really tend to try to mitigate that risk. What if it offends these people? What if it offends these people? If it does, then your content, in my mind, has actually worked because you know, being forgotten is not the goal. Creating engagement and conversation opportunities is. So I think that you have to have a unique view and speak like a human and, hopefully incorporate stuff that's not just inside baseball. So pulling in from other disciplines, experts, or even case studies.
Wow. You said a lot there. I just want to unpack
I
each of these
did.
pieces because I think it's super powerful what you're talking about. I especially liked your perspective on really creating an emotional response. You want people to swear, share, or care, right? So I think that's powerful. As if you're thinking about again B2B content, whether it's you've got a background in hiring, uh, we do a lot of work in my agency in tech. You've got there's just so many areas in B2B where you're kind of selling a return on investment, trying to lower costs, improve productivity. How do you find that the emotional connection in those kinds of campaigns?
Yeah, so I don't think that uh, let me kind of reframe that. So I think that most companies plan content and create it under the supposition of like this is what we want our audience to know, with very little triangulation on this is what they care about, right? So we talk about persona-based marketing and ICPs, but ultimately we're trying to push an agenda rather than creating one that's going to resonate with our audience. And so I think that that is really, really important to create, I guess, a modicum of credibility and trust, not only around the outcomes that everyone else is talking about, because let's be honest, you don't need to beat to death. We're going to create efficiencies and save you, time and money. Because if you don't, there's a good chance that contract's not going to be that long for the taking. But if you can create at scale kind of that parasocial sense of this person gets me, I have a resonance with what they're saying, and they sound like a human being, not like a ghostwriter or a software salesman. That is what leads to not only like sales, but long-term mutually beneficial relationships and much bigger accounts as time progresses. Really, so it's about building essentially the illusion of knowing that person at the company and doing so at scale. And voice, tone, and style are the only way you can do that. And the only way you can get the voice, tone, and style is to not sound like a marketer and sound like a human who cares.
Yeah, I think in principle, I think everybody would agree with that. But take me maybe through some examples or strategies that, organizations can use to find that tone, voice, and style. Is it, there's a big trend right now, especially in startups for founder-led content. Is it trying to make the founder sound personable and get his or her voice out there and, get that message out there? Is it creating maybe it's an avatar or a mascot that we animate, that creates some kind of we all think of the Geico ad, right? With something that's
Mhm.
animated that can kind of get out there. These are just maybe two ideas, but how do you kind of get to a strategy to kind of create tone, voice, or style that's unique or interesting, as you think about, how to help companies break through that and create that voice.
So to me, this is really the shifting role of content marketing in-house in general. And that is it should be uh, a project that is not being led from the top down, but rather from the bottom up. So if I'm interested in technology, for example, and we'll use, HubSpot as an example, there's so many different people contributing to that platform who have very specific expertise and or very specific interests and focus, but the aggregate of all of those people is what creates the uniqueness behind the product, right? There are a lot of CRMs, but when it comes down to it, you really start seeing the reflection of those individuals in how the product is designed, how accounts are serviced, roadmap prioritization, all that sort of stuff. So I think a centralized, with CMS with a bunch of like freelancers ready to go, very strict brand guidelines. That to me is almost an anachronism, or it's like a low cost agency approach. What I really think you need to do is let employees tell their own stories in their own voices, give them the bylines, and really be the arbiter of that. You always get pushback, certainly from engineers like I don't write, I don't know how to do that. And that's totally okay. Um, if you transcribe a conversation with them, capture a video, really across mediums, as long as it is a real face or a real person, and they're talking about what they actually do or what value they're delivering, rather than the royal we and a founder who generally most people who aren't active in capital markets could care less about, frankly. Um, that's really the way to go. It also makes employees more engaged and builds a much better sense of community within the organization, as well as credibility without.
Wow, very cool. So obviously there's a lot of ways to do that, but you're saying one of the best ways to do that is really to give employees a voice and get their message out there so that they can really tell the story in a more personal way that connects with other people. What do you think about these other kind of crazy ideas that I shared, which is like maybe the founder-led story or the animation or the mascot or I don't know, there's 100 different ways to do this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so there are 100 ways to do that, and I do like mascots. By the way, my experience tells that the more furry kind of cartoony you can get, weirdly, the better it performs at enterprise B2B. Don't know why that is, but I do think companies really make a big error in creating a cult of personality, for lack of a better word, around
Mm.
founders. And if most founders that I've worked with and experienced, one, there's the assumption that they're ghostwriting or they're having a ghostwriter work with them, which is an instant erosion of credibility from a content perspective.
Mm.
As good as some executive blogs are content wise, at the same time, like I kind of want to know who it was who ideated that and then got sign off for. But they also are in a position to craft a pitch not for clients and not for end users, but for capital markets investors, right? And so that it needs to be the story that they're focused on rather than the go-to-market story because people want to see that they're working with people and not a monolithic corporation. And generally, founders are really bad at kind of being human and being themselves and being, I guess, vulnerable.
Yeah, and relatable. Yes. Well, let's come back to your idea. So you've got you work with a client and you're going to get their employees engaged and telling the story
Mhm.
and get that out there. You've established the brand guidelines, you've got the guardrails around this thing, and you've got this group of employees who are willing to do this. What could be the role of AI in helping execute that kind of campaign? Or is it really not important and we should just really focus on individual stories to kind of carry the day?
Well, no, I think that AI is a great tool for a couple of reasons. One, it allows non-writers or people who I don't have the time to do that to at least create some structure which, editing is way easier than writing, so it eliminates that whole big page problem. And if you're working with an organization, you can iterate on kind of the same instance, so it becomes a lot more collaborative. Obviously, when it comes to things like validating with statistics or citations or research, hours and hours of time savings. But I also think when it comes to just building that basic ideation, outlines, theses, stuff like that, it helps, take away a lot of that heavy lifting up front and really boils it away from, the context into the content, right? So you don't need all of the exposition or thinking. You can just kind of create and iterate. And that's what's awesome about it, I think.
Yeah, well, it can be a really powerful accelerator for all that. I can definitely see how you could really using that strategy, get to a place where people care and you're connecting with people. But how do you bring the emotional side into that? How do you bring in, the swear, share, or care piece when you're
Yeah.
maybe interviewing engineers or you're interviewing, you know, salespeople or interview marketers, whoever you're or is telling the story for the company? How do you get them to kind of create more of an emotional story, or does that just happen naturally because they're people and they're going to tell the story as people, and it's going to come across in a more empathetic way naturally?
Well, you obviously want to create empathy. That's I think a fundamentally important thing. So how do you get people to care starts with to the earlier point, writing and addressing things that they care about. And you should be writing for those your ICP, your the people who are buying your product, as opposed to the mistake so many companies make, which is writing for an algorithm, which is why everything ends up sounding so sanitized, right? And so I definitely think that when it comes to creating emotional resonance, honestly, look at X, great example for this, and there are obviously a lot of others. Uh, what I advise doing, what's always really successful, is not necessarily being a contrarian for the sake of like just creating dissent and argument, but the goal of content, at least outcome wise, is engagement, right? Because if it just gets lost in inbox, who cares? And like I said, an angry note or tweet opens the door to a conversation. But one of the other goals of marketing, and particularly content marketing, has always been competitive differentiation, right? And so one of the things that I would encourage companies to do, obviously don't go overboard, is look at what everyone else is writing, and you're going to see the same four or five themes that almost always have consensus around them. So, an example would be that AI, despite actually any empirical evidence of this, increases productivity of individual workers and frees up time. Well, I don't know that actually that's statistically true, but I guarantee that if I'm an AI product, that's going to be a through line for half my content marketing. Take the contrarian side, and another great use case, you can pull the data immediately to validate whether or not that's a fair statement. But in a world where everyone is, arguing on one side, that's a lot of noise. The signal comes from saying, you know what, they're actually wrong. And here's another way to think about it. And here's the data to back it up. Or here is the credible citation that I'm basing this off of, along with my own lived experience. So that's what I think it is like find a different angle, ideally one that rejects the conventional thinking, because that's how innovation happens. And I think particularly you talk about like the engineer, founder, tech crowd, that ultimately is what they're looking for in partners.
Yeah, they want the next great idea. Now, have you or can you use products like ChatGPT or Google Gemini to help you find those contrarian ideas? Or is that an essential human function where we've got to consume the data, understand those kind of ideas, and then realize whether or not they're powerful or not?
Yeah, so with the caveat that like I was just ready to report ChatGPT in business use cases is accurate about 60% of the time when it comes to this. So I would be very careful with fact checking, but I would use it more for ideation than that. But it's as simple as taking a list of like either competitors or topics, saying what are the like recurring themes that this competitive subset's talking about. And it will break it down immediately for you. And that it does a really good job because it indexes and structures the result as well. From there, I just look for what isn't being said,
Hmm.
or what is an angle that I can take that's going to not only be like a new look, but also one that gets us not as thought leaders, but as people who are willing to look at an issue, think differently, and sometimes like uh, say no to business as usual. And so, yeah, I think that AI is great at identifying, like SEMrush, even like an old tool, or Google Insights will tell you what's trending and what kind of the topics are within those trends. And you'll be able to very quickly identify gaps in in those stories, or fallacies that are the result of an echo chamber and marketers generally reusing the same content and changing citations.
Yeah, very powerful. So instead of asking ChatGPT, what are some interesting topics I could be writing about around X topic? You're really, I mean, you're doing more than this, but you're really saying, what are the fallacies? What are the gaps in my competitor's content? What are the emotional hooks that I can really focus on that will make people sit up and notice, right? Something like
Yeah,
that.
and I think
Yeah.
that's a huge function of marketing is to do that identification and then kind of figure out strategically who in the organization is probably going to be the most credible at telling that story. But here is what I will say though, is a warning. If you have to go and use an AI tool to create a list of things to write about, that's a big, big red flag for me, because it automatically means you don't really know enough or care enough to be able to at least go one level deeper on your own, and that will inevitably end sounding like everyone else. It could be contrarian, but it'll also be boring and probably poorly informed.
So have people that are smart enough to know the issues and the topics that their buyers care about in order to come up with those really cool issues.
Yeah, have a sense of what it is that you care about and what you're passionate about, because ultimately the best check is this content that I'm interested in? Because if you're not, there's no way your audience is going to be. And then it just becomes disposable.
Yeah, very powerful. All right, so you've got your list of issues, you've got your strategy. Is AI helping you today create that content? And how are you thinking about AI tools and creating content? Or is it important to stay more natural and avoid AI created tools in order to gain that authenticity?
Yeah, so I generally don't use it for actual writing, and I'll often use it for outlining.
Mhm.
I would say my most broad use case is because I kind of do stream of consciousness and then edit as I go. I'll often have a hot take or say some sweeping generalization that, again, I'll have to be able to find a data source to back that up. So it's ideal for that. If I'm like, most technology professionals right now are still lagging behind the AI adoption curve. I think, like, inherently we know that's true, but if I say find me sources for this, then I'm adding credibility because it's instantly giving me data. It's instantly giving me a backlink, and if you do it right, that's going to have some benefit when it comes to discoverability as well, as a nice bonus, right? So yeah, that's what I'm using it for largely. The other best use for it, if you're somebody like me, I don't have to work with a designer anymore, and everything looks great. And that is the best victory of all. Is the chance to add that visual component to your content that in the past would have either been expensive, impossible, or taken forever.
Yeah, that's cool. So you can really use it to help you create those ideas, the outlines, but you're owning the writing, the messaging itself, and then leveraging some other tools to make it pop, maybe we want to say it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely correct. And the other good thing is if you've published anything, or you've written anything and you can upload it, you can just append in the style of insert name here, and it will automatically train that instance to write in your voice to a certain extent. You still have to edit a little bit, but it's a really, really good shortcut for people whose interior monologues aren't necessarily as strong as, like, Hemingway, for example. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Matt, this has been a great conversation. I've really learned a lot and thought made me think much more deeply about provocative content, bring out the emotional side, leveraging employees to tell the story, and really making the content much more powerful. So thank you for sharing all that with our audience today. If
thank you
people
for
want to,
humoring me, and I'm flattered to have been on the show. And
yeah, appreciate
thank
it. And
Yeah.
if people want to connect with you directly, learn more about you and maybe how you can work with them, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, so I would say mattcharney.com is sort of like where a lot of my content lives. And unfortunately, I am on LinkedIn most of the time because of the industry I focus on. So, connect with me there, and I'm always happy to help.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Matt. I really appreciate the conversation. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.